Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Tropics Talk. In the 24 hours since our last video, we had store number 4, Danny, form up, make landfall, fall apart. That's it on that storm, but it's still plenty active in the Atlantic, still plenty to talk about here this morning. Yeah, you look at the wide view, the remnant low of Danny is swirling over parts of Georgia and South Carolina. Not going to be much further impacts from that going forward through the day here today. But there are two waves to track in what we call the main development region of the Atlantic, the area of the Atlantic we typically don't even start worrying about and watching until we get to August, but not so in the already awfully busy 2021 hurricane season. So right now, again, it's basically two waves in a broad area of storminess, two separate features that the models are trying to pick up on, develop, potentially not develop. One that's looking much healthier this morning, that's a little bit closer to the Caribbean. I have that one highlighted in orange. Hurricane Center gives that a medium chance to develop in their latest update. And then a second wave lagging behind that one that has a low chance to develop per the Hurricane Center. As I'm going to show you, though, in the models, that second wave is the one that many are latching onto for potential development here this morning. But let's take a look at both. Next names on the list, Elsa and Fred. Hopefully we don't have to use either of them with these, but that first wave, it's looking pretty impressive here this morning. At least the thunderstorm activity has been able to hold itself together, and there's a fairly well-defined concentric pattern to it. Now, the question is this just the thunderstorm activity that tends to fire up overnight, or is this going to sustain itself? Is this going to collapse in the next couple of hours, or is this going to sustain itself? Are we seeing the beginnings of a tropical depression forming? What I'm looking at in particular, that sort of arc of clouds coming off of this. Is this outflow? Is this the storms collapsing? Is this the beginning of some upper level venting? As this is starting to really flare up now? And we won't know that for the next couple hours at the very least. But again, at the very least, we are seeing some healthy thunderstorm activity within that right now. Definitely the healthiest it has looked in the past 48 hours. And it is at the very least going to bring some wind and some rainfall to the eastern Caribbean islands later on. Now, this one looking far less organized. Although as I zoom in here, you see a little bit of a swirl. One little feature looked to flare up there and swirl its way southward. But this is showing clearly collapsing thunderstorm activity, and it's broad and disorganized at this point in time, the center of that wave. It is not far behind the first wave we talked about. This is also going to work off to the west, both of which will be little features that bear watching going forward. Now, let me take you through some models. This is the European forecast model, the ensemble. You take a model, you tweak it a number of different ways, you run it out, and you get a number of different solutions. If they show sort of the same thing, you have some confidence in that. Well, the European is not impressed whatsoever with either of these features. The first one, it's a couple of the members brings it into the Caribbean. It's tough to pick out which of the waves is with. There's all these different lines, but you can see the first one, there's a few that start right east of the Lesser Antilles, most of them breaking apart as it works into the central Caribbean. The second, you can see more of those lines extending towards the eastern Atlantic. Dark blue would be something tropical depression or weaker, keeps it at that strength, gets to the Caribbean, then some of them flare it up into a tropical storm, but barely any of those members surviving into the Gulf of Mexico. Now compare that, sort of lock that in the back of your head, take a mental snapshot of it, compare that to this, the latest run of the GFS. You're seeing a lot more color. You're seeing a lot more of these members developing something, most of them latching on to that second, that lagging wave, showing a tropical storm forming up before the Caribbean, becoming a hurricane in the Caribbean Sea, and then making its way into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, is that locked in? Absolutely not. In fact, I think at this point, this latest run of the GFS is definitely developing something way too quickly. Again, when you look at what's going on out there, you're just not seeing that development. In the wind pattern right now on the GFS forecast model, which I'm going to take you through, it actually shows a closed off low. So perhaps that's out there. It's tough to say, as it's so far out in the eastern Atlantic, but there's really no sign of that from the satellite presentation. So I think it's already closed off the low, and it's taking that feature and developing it way too quickly. But here's what this forecast model does. There you go. It has a closed off low pressure area. It has, that would be at least a tropical depression, if not a tropical storm by tomorrow evening with that second wave. Note the first one, I've circled that first yellow circle. that's just an open wave of low pressure at that point in time. It completely disintegrates anything with that wave by the time it moves in the eastern Caribbean Sea. So I will let that circle fade away. We continue to track that second wave, and man, oh man, it deepens that too. That would probably be, if that model were to verify, a hurricane south of Hispaniola by the time we get to Saturday. It holds it together, moves it through the Caribbean. It's in the western Caribbean by the time we get to Tuesday, and then moves into the Gulf of Mexico by the middle of next week. So we're talking a week out from now. Is this locked in stone? Absolutely not. A couple things to think about. Generally speaking, an old forecasting rule. If something doesn't form by the time it gets to the Caribbean, chances are it won't form until it gets at least to the Western Caribbean. This model run has something forming before it gets to the islands. I still don't know if that's necessarily in the cards. Definitely not set in stone right now. And a big part of the reason why, I mean, just look at how much Saharan dust is out there right now. There's just so much dry air in the vicinity of that wave, and I put this forward into motion. By the time this would be arriving in the Caribbean by the weekend, I mean, there's still the southern edge of this huge plume of Saharan dust. Now, that little sort of blue area showing up to the south and east of Puerto Rico, I think that's the models keying in on something trying to spin up, but I'm just hard-pressed to understand how there could be that intense of a cyclone in that large plume of Saharan dust. Maybe it's small enough, compact enough that it can spin itself up without the wider influence of that dry air, but I would really think that keeps a lid on things. I would not expect to see something ramping up in the next 24 hours out of that wave that looks so disorganized on the satellite presentation here this morning. So I'm hoping that run of the GFS is something we can just throw in the garbage, and the next couple runs that come in here today and into tomorrow are going to show a much different, much quieter look, something more like what the European ensemble shows. Just a couple weak waves, perhaps a brief spin up of a tropical storm in the Caribbean. But, you know, we've already had 4 storms this year. It's already pretty active so far. And if 2020 was any indication, it's to not necessarily bet against things forming out there. So some takeaways for today. Danny formed up yesterday, made landfall near Hilton Head, and is now gone. Further impacts not expected from that. It's just a remnant low in parts of the southeast. We're tracking 2 separate waves in the main development region of the Atlantic as we keep things very busy for late June, both of which we'll be watching. Way more questions than answers right now, but definitely something, if you live anywhere along the Gulf Coast, to be keeping an eye on as we go through the next couple of days. But, you know, that's what we do during hurricane season. You know, you watch each and every wave out there. You track them day to day. You don't worry yourselves too much. But again, you do keep a watchful eye on these potential storms that pop up in the models all season long. So we'll be tracking that for you. Chief Meteorologist John Patrick, he'll be back with a full update tonight on ABC 7 News at 6, 7, 11. And of course, I'll be back tomorrow morning with the latest as well. Until next time, Meteorologist Jim Dickey.